Hello, and welcome to Lightways at Life Astrologer with me, Anna Isabel. And I'm delighted to welcome Bernard Eccles.
Hello.
Hello, Bernard. Now, I thought it'd be good to have you on because you're giving an intriguing talk at the Astrological Lodge's seminar, a history seminar, entitled Kepler, Pioneer of Science or Last Pythagorean. Yeah. So I was looking at that and I was very intrigued and I thought it'd be nice to have a chat.
Sure.
So who is Kepler, for those who don't know?
Kepler is usually considered to be one of the great pioneers of science, but what I hope to show is that it's almost accidental that he gets that tag. And really what he is, he's a working scholar and an astrologer and an astronomer, born 1571, dies 1630, so he dies when he's 58, but he's right in the middle of all of the religious discord and political upheaval that's going on in Central Europe. And he finds himself hard pushed to make a living, to bring up his family, to stay on the right side of his sponsors, to work with his colleagues and fellow explorers of early science like Tycho Brahe, and generally to try and get along. And it's really quite tough for him. And somehow in the middle of this, he's still got a very strong religious view of the universe and how he thinks it ought to work, and how the mathematics of it ought to work. And he sort of just plugs away at that. So, you know, later science paints him as this sort of almost gilded person, this person of marvelous mathematics. And it's true, his maths is marvelous, but it takes him years to get it right. And he never really moves from his religious viewpoint. So I really think he's quite an interesting guy, caught between the ancient world and the modern world, which will come after him. But where he actually finds himself is in the middle of political and religious upheaval all the way through his life. He doesn't have an easy time of it.
It does seem that he comes from a very interesting time where there's a great deal of change. Can you paint a little bit of a picture of what is going on at the time?
Well, you've got a big dissonance going on between the Catholic Church, which has been there forever, and the Protestant states. And Protestantism, as you know, starts with Luther in Germany, and then throughout the Holy Roman Empire and the German states, you've got people who are going with Protestantism, and then people who are saying, no, we want to stay with Catholicism. And Catholicism itself can't work out whether it wants to accept the new science following Copernicus's discovery that the Earth goes around the sun, and you know, Galileo, for example, a little bit later finds himself on the wrong side of the Catholic courts on that one. So people have got to decide which side of it they want to be on. But it's not just a personal thing about I prefer this. It has, you know, a very real dimension to it as well, because it depends on your living could depend on it. You could be living in a town which finds itself in the path of a war and this sort of thing. It's a tremendously difficult time for Europe generally, and it's not just how you worship, it's what and whether and how you believe the cosmos to be. And it's not really a good time to be out on a limb and saying, well, I think differently. You know, you got to be pretty brave to do that, I think.
Yes, indeed. And the themes of censorship are things that we are sadly not that unfamiliar with.
No, not now. This is true.
And so, but in that instance, in that time, your life could depend on, it's not just your livelihood, your whole life.
Yes, quite literally, your life could. Yeah.
So, okay, so that's the background. Why is he important? Obviously, mathematical genius, but what is important about his contribution?
He's the first person to work out that the planets don't go round the sun in circles, and that they go round in ellipses, and that those ellipses have mathematical laws governing them, which, once you've worked them out, are the same for all the planets. He posits what are now called the three laws, Kepler's first law, second law, third law. I don't think he labeled them as that. But the thing is, every time we find a new planet, whether it's an asteroid or one further out, something like Eris or Pluto or something like that, it still fits in with Kepler's established laws. So he got it right. But he was very upset, I think, to find that the universe was not actually a series of circles. I think he wanted it to be circles. Everybody wanted it to be circles. And the ancient world decided that it would be circles. The medieval world had spent 1,000 years saying they are circles. Copernicus turns it upside down and says, well, no, actually circles they may be, but it's the sun at the middle, not the sun going around the Earth, but the other way around. And then Kepler looks at the planet's positions and says, but if they're going around in circles, then the maths is wrong. And so he has to look at that. I mean, it's been done before by Ptolemy, but Ptolemy has these epicycles and they're not right for Kepler. He doesn't like it. So he has to look at, well, what other shape could they be, the orbits? And it takes him a while. And apparently he overlooked at the beginning that they might be ellipses because he thought it was such a simple answer that surely the ancient world had already looked at this and rejected it, hadn't they? And then he looks again and realizes the ancient world had not rejected it. So he goes, oh, okay, let's have a look at this. But it's how much effort does it take, mental effort, to step outside a prevailing worldview and say, I think it's different? I mean, Copernicus did it by changing the sun to the middle. But then for Kepler to do it and take it a step further, it's hugely brave. And yet, what he's doing it for is not the march of science, as it were, but he's doing it for his astrology. Because if you have a set of tables which enable you to say where the planets are going to be, I don't know, 50, 60 years in the future, this is the basis of astrological prediction. If you know those tables are inaccurate, your prediction's rubbish. So therefore, you have to have better tables. And he spends a large part of his working life creating a set of things which are called the Rudolphine tables, named after the Holy Roman Emperor Rudolph II at the time. And he's doing the hard maths. He's putting in the hard miles to give astrologers and astronomers a better set of tables. But he's not trying to take the astrology out of it. He's not trying to kind of strip off the maths and say, this is important on its own and that astrology is now falling apart. No, he wants to improve his astrology, I think.
So this begs the question, how accurate were predictions before Kepler?
Yes, it does. Yeah, it does. But where you go down this particular rabbit hole is with the techniques of prediction of the day. You see, it's fairly easy to see where the planets are now. You look, and to make an ephemeris for the present day is really, it's not that hard. So you then create a horoscope. But to say where that horoscope would be by moving it forwards in time 30 or 40 years, if you haven't got accurate tables, you can't do anything with it. So what you have to do is find ways of manipulating that particular horoscope. So the techniques of the day, things like primary progressions, they work with one chart, the original horoscope. The transits that we use now, because we just look them up in nice big books, just weren't around. And people don't use transits then. They use things like profection, where you just walk the ordinary horoscope round a sign at a time. Yeah.
Of course. And that is very often when we're learning astrology in our time, and we're looking at prediction, the emphasis is on transits to begin with,
Sure.
at least.
Yeah.
And then the other techniques later on, because transits are the easiest to see, so to speak. But in actual fact, in his time, that wasn't so possible. And it would have been also the fact that horary was, I suspect, the primary tool of astrologers at that time.
Yes.
Doing doing a chart for the moment, so it doesn't matter whether you can predict where planets are going to be in a year or two's time.
That's right.
Because you're actually just working with the chart of the moment.
That's it. Yeah, absolutely so.
So,
but transits have their own problem, because everybody knows that the slower a transit, the more weight it will apply to your chart. So therefore, we tend to work with outer planets. And we ignore minor planet transits, things like Mercury and Venus, because they're over and done in an afternoon. And we wait for the outer planets and we say, oh, I've got Uranus going over my solar degree. Well, it'll be doing that backwards and forwards for the better part of a year. So yeah, you'll probably notice something. But the outer planets generally tend to be malefic. So what we have is a gloomy timetable of forthcoming disasters. We don't have a timetable that we can feel happy with. And that's something that people don't think about when using transits.
well, funnily enough, I've actually just in August been doing a course on transits of the inner planets, precisely because I felt that, or I feel that there is not enough emphasis on transits of the inner planets. And yet they are about the day-to-day life. The moon, particularly, if you want to understand your moods, if you want to understand your ups and downs, just look at the moon. It's the daily stuff of life is the moon. Perhaps the weekly might be more to do with the others, and certainly the sun has got its seasons in our charts also. So
sure.
So this is something that I feel very strongly about, so strongly that I've just done a course on it. So.
Do you not also feel that as the sun moves around your chart, that you have a sort of, I don't know, a happy time when it crosses the ascendant, and then you've got 4 seasons from there down to the bottom, up to the descendant, up to the top, and then I often find the empty 3 months where it's coming through 10, 11, and 12.
I have to say that whenever it crosses my ascendant, I feel like giving 3 great cheers. It's a very uncomfortable time as it's transiting my 12th house, because that's when it's also square my sun also. So it's,
right.
Yes, so it's a double whammy there, going through the 12th whilst squaring my sun. So it's never a fun time. But so, and that's the stuff of the sun, the seasons of our lives, as we can see through the sun. And every year is different, but at the same time, every year is the same, because people will always say, oh, things always happen to me on this month. Every year, this month seems to be the one. I hate this month. Well, that'll be why. Let's look at what's happening to the sun at that time of year in your chart. So that's quite a lovely difference between the modern world of astrology as we know it and the world. And it's almost difficult to imagine a world in which the accuracy of the tables didn't matter because they weren't used. And then
I mean, you were just saying about the moon being something that you use nowadays, but accurate lunar tables don't come until after Kepler. I mean, to work out the moon's position is actually fiendishly difficult if you want it accurately, because it was used in navigation. And one of the big problems in the 18th century, which is 200 years after Kepler, is that people still couldn't work out exactly where the moon was going to be. So if you were using the moon's position as an aid to navigation to how far across the Pacific you actually were, you could be several hundred miles out if your moon position wasn't right. And it was really, really difficult to do. And you'd be surprised. I mean, if you've ever tried programming, you probably haven't tried writing code. I did back in the 80s, astrological programs. There are so many perturbations, as they're called, little extra things you have to take into account of Saturn. They run into pages and pages. Just getting these things nailed down to minutes of arc is phenomenally difficult to do. For Kepler, the problem was Mars. And Mars is even on a kind of dead reckoning basis, Mars is very difficult to do. He would have found Mars a challenge. So in fact, his proof of his elliptical orbits and so on and so forth that he puts out in his works, actually the work is all done on Mars. Mars was the thing that was annoying him. Mars was the one he wanted to fix. And maybe that's because he saw Mars as an activator, because it's light enough to be an inner planet, but heavy enough to be an outer planet, if you see what I mean. Mars really does hit you. And he wanted to know where Mars was going to be.
Yes, I would say that Mars certainly packs a punch.
Yes, it does. It does.
Where transits are concerned, Mars certainly packs a punch. Well, and of all the planets that would have irritated him of his time, Mars would have been the one, wouldn't it? What do you think it is in his chart that drives him to do this work and to take the risks that he took in doing it?
I don't know. I really don't know. I mean, when you look at a chart, you can interpret it any way you want, in a way. I mean, you've got the family man, you've got the profoundly religious man, and he won't let go of that. You've got the scholar, you've got the school teacher. He becomes a school teacher in his later life, and then of course you've got the mathematician. There is a drive for precision, but at the same time, there's a spiritual thing to it as well. And it's difficult to sort of say which bit you really want to say, yeah, that's him, that's the core of him.
What is it about his chart that stands out for you?
I don't know. Just take the whole thing, and just sort of try and bring it into a wholeness. Really, it is. I tell you what's difficult. It's difficult taking the outer planets out and trying to see it as he would have seen it. Because normally, you get everything and you go, oh yes, look at that. But you've got to see it as he would have seen it, which is actually quite tricky. What I like about him, I think, is that he doesn't really move. It sounds wrong to say that he doesn't move on. He does move on, but when he writes, and he does a different version of it, a second version of it in 1621. There's 27 years between them. And all he's doing is refining his ideas. He hasn't changed his view. And so I think when people take him as a kind of founding father or an early saint for the Church of Science, they're not looking at the bits they don't want. They're not looking at the fact that he was really into, I was writing some notes on this afternoon, and I think Christian geometry is about the best that I can say for it. He really thinks that there ought to be there are simple mathematical ratios which govern the structure of the solar system, which to him show the handiwork of his creator. But to a modern scientist, they simply show the supremacy of maths. You see, we've taken the faith out of the science, and for him, it's the basis of it.
Yes, and of course, even in our time, there is not all scientists have taken faith out of science, because there are some who are looking at a great architect who has designed the universe as it is, etc. They may not be as vocal or perhaps as many, but they do exist. So this is an ongoing story, I guess, which begins in his time, because what do we do? What do we do with this information? How do we interpret it? What is our view? Is it a purely materialist view? Or do we believe that there is something more? And I think matters of faith are definitely something many of us still struggling with. For some, the debate is over, one side or the other. Others are much more still working out where they stand. I guess that's why we have agnostics.
Well, yes, but do you not think that the current I don't know, the people who have been born since the middle 1990s have a more developed spiritual side to them than the people from the generation immediately previous.
I would say that despite all efforts of materialists to eradicate the superstition, as they would call it, and nonsense out of society, that the harder they try to do it, the greater the interest becomes. And certainly I agree with you that there is an increasing interest amongst many young people. But I would say also that that is true of the more mature generations who have been brought up in a materialist world and are saying, do you know what? My experience says there's more to us than more to this and more to us than I have been led to believe. And I feel that particularly in the last couple of years, that has intensified across all age groups. So it's just interesting that you're giving this talk, and I guess maybe that's what attracted me to it at this particular time, because there are things happening now which are making me think of that time.
I suppose so. Yes. Yeah. Yeah.
It
I'm
feels
kind
like
of I'm kind of worried about the movements of Pluto as it I know I shouldn't from a Keplerian point of view, but you know, it obeys Kepler's rules. As it moves into Aquarius and Pisces, I think we'll see some very interesting spiritual movements, some spiritual resurgences, something like that. It'll take us a good few years before it happens. You know, these things need time to grow, but they will be there.
They will be there, and let us remember that we have Neptune in Pisces, and that
For sure.
itself is waving its magic wand, in some cases for much better, and in some cases for
maybe the people who are born with it. Maybe the people who are born with it will find it activated when Pluto passes over it over that part of Neptune of Pisces for them, which will be in what 30-40 years time, something like that. And so what was rooted in them, what was lain dormant in them, what was born in them, will find its expression. I think so.
I think so. And also interesting within this context would be people who are born with Neptune aspects. Neptune,
yes,
Pisces,
always. Yeah. Yes.
New signs born in this period, and the water signs born in this period could be very interesting.
Yeah. Yeah. And the Neptune-Pluto sextiles, which was such a feature of the 1950s, 60s, 70s, and early 80s, they're coming back. They're coming back in the middle 2020s until early 2032. So we have actually a set of sextiles which has taken over 80 years to work itself through. But this little second bunch of them, actually, the way they are, you've got a shape coming up, haven't you, that's got Uranus in as well, and they're all linked together in the middle of this decade, so in about 3 or 4 years from now. And that is going to be something to see. That's going to be something quite special. That will awaken something, I'm fairly sure. Yeah. Yeah.
Well, we shall have to wait and see. And in the meantime, I think if people would like to learn more about Kepler and his chart, because we've been skirting around his chart and saying,
oh no, you have to attend the lecture to hear what I'm going to say.
So I think we've done a very nice job of whetting people's appetites. And
I hope so. I hope so.
And there will be a link to the talk on the description box to this podcast.
Thank you.
And in the meantime, if people also wanted to learn more about you, how do they do that, Bernard?
Oh, the usual ways. Rootle about the internet, you'll find me. You also find me at the astrological societies so frequently, you know, it's hard not to find me.
Is there a website?
No.
Okay, all right then. I shall let people discover you for themselves. And thank you very much for joining us today.
Pleasure. Thank you. Thanks for having me.
Thank you all for watching. And next time we're going to be looking at horary astrology to find lost objects. Until then, goodbye.